All right, this video is going to help us fill out our learning card on designing experiments. We're going to dig a little bit deeper with experiments and look at some vocabulary, quite a bit of vocabulary on this learning card. So we're going to start off by looking at the purpose of an experiment. So the purpose of an experiment is to see if a specific treatment actually causes an effect. I'm going to make another note here that says only data collection that shows cause and effect. An experiment is the only one that shows cause and effect. A survey does not show cause and effect. A simulation does not show cause and effect, and neither does an observational study. Just experiments. So here we have three different characteristics of a well-designed experiment. One is control. And what that means is that you are controlling the variables to make things similar for each one of your test subjects or experimental units. You want to make all of the variables the same, because if some of the variables are different within the experiment, then you're going to get different results. You want everything to stay the same except for the variable that is being affected by the treatments that you give. So control the variables, everything about the experiment except for the treatments. Those would be the only things that are different. Now we go to the control group, and that is a group that does not receive the actual treatment. Now, they might get a placebo or a sugar pill. We'll talk about the placebo effect here in just a second, but a control group is a group within your experiment that does not receive the actual treatment, whether it's a drug or a specific maybe fertilizer if you're working with plants, whatever it may be, the control group does not get the treatment. Now, there's a difference between controlling the variables and the control group. You do not have to have a control group for your experiment. It's a good idea to have one, but there doesn't have to be a control group. But in order to have a well-designed experiment, you should control the variables. There's a little bit of a difference between those two, and people get those mixed up. Controlling the variables does not mean have a control group, but having a control group can be a good characteristic for a well-designed experiment in addition to controlling the variables. So now let's talk about the placebo effect. Well, a placebo is a fake drug. Lots of times it's just a sugar pill that you would give to a control group, and those people think they're getting a real treatment, but in reality they are not. It's just a fake treatment that's not supposed to do anything. But sometimes when people take a placebo, what happens is the effect of the actual drug or treatment actually occurs, and that's called the placebo effect. So the definition is a response because you think you are getting an actual treatment. So something happens, but it's just your mind and your body changing things, when in reality the placebo, the fake drug, is not doing anything at all. Another characteristic of a well-designed experiment is replication. And what we mean by that is that you are going to replicate on multiple test subjects. Can you get the same results, the same replication for multiple test subjects? And does that occur over multiple studies? Just doing an experiment on one test subject is not good. And just doing an experiment one time is not good enough either. If you can replicate the results of an experiment over multiple test subjects and multiple studies, then that is a good thing. So we want to work replication into designing our experiments. Then the last characteristic of a well-designed experiment is randomization. What we mean by that is that we are going to randomly assign subjects to treatments or treatment groups. When we are running a survey, you are randomly choosing the people for your survey. But when you randomize within an experiment, you are randomly assigning your test subjects to the different treatment groups. You do not randomly choose the test subjects. In most cases, when you are running an experiment, you want certain people with certain characteristics. So you are specifically choosing people to be a part of your experiment and your statistical study. So you don't randomly choose the people or randomly choose the test subjects. Once you have your test subjects, that's when you randomly assign them to a treatment group. And those are the characteristics of a well-designed experiment. Controlling the variables, replication over multiple subjects and multiple studies, and randomizing the treatments or randomly assigning the test subjects to a treatment group. All right, let's look at a few more definitions over here on the right side. Experimental units, those are the individuals to experiment on. The individuals that you're going to experiment on are called experimental units. Now, if you're talking about people, sometimes they're called test subjects, but the generalized term is experimental units. Next, we have the factors of an experiment, and those are the explanatory variables. If you are testing out a new drug, then the medicine itself is a factor. If you were experimenting on plants and you were giving different levels of water, different amounts of water, and you were also giving different amounts of fertilizer, then the factors would be the water and the fertilizer. Those would be the factors. The levels are the specific amounts of each factor. So if I was talking about fertilizer on plants and I gave one plant 1 pellet of fertilizer and another plant 2 pellets of fertilizers and another plant no fertilizer at all, those would be considered levels. So the specific amounts for each factor is a level. And then we have the treatment. A treatment is a specific condition applied to the experimental unit. So if I give one of those plants that I was just talking about a full cup of water and 1 pellet of fertilizer, that would be a treatment. So the factors, levels, and treatments go together. If you multiply the number of factors by the number of levels, then you're going to get the total number of treatments. So a specific condition applied to the experimental units. Now down here in this space, what we want to do is diagram an experiment. This is something we should be able to do. And I'm going to go ahead and diagram an experiment right now. I'm going to go ahead and use the plant experiment that I was describing. So let's start off by giving what kind of experiment I'm going to use. There are a number of different types of experiments that we can set up, but this specific one is going to be a completely randomized design. That just means that my test subjects, or I should say experimental units, which in this case are going to be plants, will be completely randomized into these different treatment groups. That's why we're going to use randomization up here. So I'm going to start off first with a question that I want to answer. All right, so here's the question I want to answer. How does the amount of water and fertilizer affect the growth of roses? Well, I'm going to start off by having 60 roses that I begin with. These 60 roses are my experimental units. Slip of the tongue there. At this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them into, I think I'm just going to do 2 treatment groups. I'm going to make things very simple here. But I'm going to split half of them into one group and half of them into another group. And the 2 treatment groups that I'm going to create from my factors and my levels are going to be a treatment group that gets water only and another group that gets water and fertilizer. So here we go. I'm going to randomly, I abbreviated here, but I'm going to randomly choose the 30 roses that go into the water only group, and then randomly choose the 30 roses that will go into the water and fertilizer treatment group. And then I run the experiment and I give all the 30 roses water only and then water and fertilizer. And then I come back together and I find my response variable. And so when I collect my response variable from each one of the plants, I then compare the results. Now let's just say the response variable in this case was the amount of growth in inches. When I get to this point, the last thing that I should do is then write a conclusion. But this right here that we have, this is a diagram of a completely randomized experiment that gives you an idea of how to answer the question, how does the amount of water and fertilizer affect the growth of roses? If I had more than more than just these two treatment groups, I would list more treatment groups in this middle section, and I can get specific with the response variable as well. But this is just a very basic diagram of a randomized designed experiment. Hopefully this helps and you have fun in your stats class.